Thank you, Karen. Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Yeah? All right, good. So, all right. So let me just say a couple of things before we dive into the material. First off, I'll be happy to send you the slides. You know what I'll do? In a few minutes, I'm going to pass around a sign-up sheet. Give me a day or two. Print your email neatly so I can read it, and I'll send you the slides. Okay? So feel free to take pictures, whatever you want to do, take notes, but you'll get the slides. Second thing, feel free to ask questions. I want to make sure you're getting what I'm sharing with you, you're understanding it, and it seems like we have a lot of time, right? 2 hours seems like a long time. It's going to go by really fast because there's a lot of information I'm going to share with you that it's going to help you because I know, because I've done this so many times and it helps pretty much everybody. Lastly, let me just mention a couple of things about my background so you can essentially understand, like, why listen to me. So I have, before I became a career coach and executive coach, I had 20 years in the corporate world. I was at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York for 5 years, JP Morgan Chase for over 11 years, and American Express for 4 years. And so that informs what I'm sharing with you. I was where you are. I had to get interviews. I had to ace interviews. I interviewed people and hired them. I did all that stuff. So it always gives me perspective that's going to help you when I talk about coaching. I've been a career and executive coach since the end of 2003, full-time since 2008. I've helped, well over 1,000 clients at this point, all over the world, mostly in the US, but in lots of other countries as well, in all aspects of the job search. And what else can I tell you? I have a couple books out. One's on advanced LinkedIn, another one's on how to deliver powerful pitches and presentations that can help you in your career. If you have questions or anything, you'll get me an email from me when I send you the slides, so you'll have my information. But you'll see my email address probably on the handouts. It's at the bottom, right? HellmanConsulting.com is the website. My email is there. And I have a lot of blog posts that can help you. I regularly write for Forbes, I'm a contributor there, among other things. So that's me. And let's dive into the content. So again, feel free to ask questions, but I want to start by asking you a question. Okay? So I'm going to ask you all, true or false, the hiring decision is made within the first minute of the interview. What do you all think? True? Is that the consensus? False? Oh, okay. One person. Anyone else false? False, false. Oh, a few falses. I'd say 3/4 true, 1/4 false at best, right? So I don't have no drum roll, sorry, but here's the answer. The answer is false, false, and because it is a common misconception. And the reason I say false, now, if you're really way off, like you come in all disheveled and muddy and dirty or something like that, probably not a good idea, right? They're not going to hire you, if you have to be dressed up for the job you want. Other than that, I've seen a no turn into a yes, even after the interview is over, many, many times. I've seen the evidence. I see how it works. Like, if you know how to play the game the right way, and I'm going to show you how, you can turn a no into a yes, and we'll discuss that, okay? So yeah, the first impressions are important, but it's not the end of the story if it's not working for you in the first impression, okay? You have a lot of opportunity to change the perception. So let's use that thought to discuss how we're going to approach the whole process of understanding how to ace the interview. So I break it up into 4 parts. The first part is understanding the strategy. The fact is, there is a strategy. Most interviewees, most of you probably are not thinking about being strategic. You're just thinking about, I hope I can make a great impression and so they hire me. But there is a strategy. We'll talk about that. Once you understand the strategy, it's much easier to understand how to prepare. So we'll talk about how to prepare, what to do at the interview, the tactics, and then how to follow up effectively. And that's where you can even turn a no into a yes. Okay, and you notice I say here the goal is to get the next meeting. So what I'm saying here is, it's not like I could have said the goal is to get the job offer, right? I'm not saying that deliberately, because if you think about it in terms of, I have to get this job offer with every interview you have, it puts a lot of pressure on you. You get nervous, and you might close too soon. You might start negotiating salary even before they made you an offer, for example, right? And listen to the words I'm using, close too soon. That's like a sales term, right? So that you need to think about the whole job search process as all sales and marketing. Even if you hate sales and marketing, you got to be like the best salesperson, the best marketer in the world. That's the mindset you want to take. And especially with interviewing, it's all sales. So the mindset you want to adopt, even if you don't like it, is, and this is why I teach a lot of people, right? To be the best salesperson in the world for yourself. You're what you're selling, right? You're the product here. And that's the attitude here. So if you just think about the goal here as to just keep getting more meetings, keep getting them to want to talk to you more, you're doing great. And it'll ultimately lead to an offer in most cases, okay? That's the attitude. Now, that said, any questions on just sort of the big picture here? Okay, so let's dive into the strategy. Now, this is what most interviewees who haven't heard me talk do, which you shouldn't do, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Is this regarding first round phone interviews with HR?
Yes, it applies to everything. The question, is it regarding first round phone interviews with HR? Phone, in-person, HR, hiring manager, executive, recruiters, headhunters, it's the same, okay? And after you hear this more, if you have specific questions about the different channels, we can revisit it, okay? All right. So the strategic mistakes that interviewees make is like they say, oh, all right, I just better prepare for every possible question they could ask me. I'm going to get one of those books out that's like 1,000 answers to 1,000 interview questions and memorize all those answers, right? And then I'm going to show how smart I am by coming up with 3 really brilliant questions to ask at the end of the interview. And then, and so those are mistakes. It seems like the right thing to do, but it's actually not, and you'll understand in a second. And then often another thing that people who aren't experienced in interviewing and don't know how to do it the right way, when they don't take a strategic approach, what they do is they'll start to spend too much time talking about things that aren't showing the interviewee, the employer, how you can help them. Like they'll start talking too long about why they left their last job or a prior job or something else. So all that, you don't want to do any of that, okay? What you want to do is, we already mentioned sales, right? You want to adopt a consultative sales strategy. Now, this is not used car sales, okay? It's consultative sales. It's a different type of sale. So has anybody here ever been a consultant? You have a couple of you, right? So this might sound familiar to you when I talk about a consultative sales strategy. You want to have a dialogue, a conversation. It's not just about answering their questions. It's like they ask you something, you answer it, then you ask them something. They answer it, and it goes back and forth. You want to have a conversation, and this is so important, that focuses on the client, right? In this case, it's the employer's problems and issues. That's what a consultant does. Am I right here? This is what you do when you're going to bid on a job. If you're trying to get a consulting gig, you're like, okay, I want to get this consulting gig. Let me go meet with them and have a hypothesis about what their problems and issues might be. Then see if I'm right. Like have this idea about what I might be able to help them with. Then you go in and you ask questions to see if that's indeed what they need help with, or is it something else? Does that make sense? Is that resonating? That's what a consultant does, right? Ask questions to confirm or disprove the hypothesis. Then maybe you come in with examples of how you've helped other clients previously to show how you can help them. And you also might share how you might be able to help them in particular going forward in the future. Is that to make your experience come alive? Does that resonate with the people who've done some consulting? It does, right? Yeah. So that's what you want to do in any interview. You want to take that same consultative sales approach. You want to have that, keep that, and I'll probably say this 10 more times. Keep the focus on the client's problems and issues. And I'm going to show you how to do that when things start to veer off. And keep that focus on the client's problems and issues through the questions you ask, and then through showing them how you can help them, either through examples from your past experience or through what you would do in the new role, okay, to make it come alive. That's how you get the offer. That's how you win the game. That's how you get the next meeting, okay? So another way to think about, and then, oh, by the way, I left out, like what consultants do. At the end, they follow up with a proposal, right? That's a little bit different than a thank you note. If you're a consultant, you don't say, thank you for meeting with you. You say, great talking with you. Here's how I can help, right? Isn't that what a consultant would do? You'd have a proposal or something, right? You want to think along those lines as a job seeker. So another way to think about this is to pretend like you already have the job. You're on the same side of the table as the interviewer, and you're just trying to help them solve their problems. You're brainstorming with them. You're trying to figure out if you're the right candidate and the right person to help and how you might be able to help them with their different issues. So, and sometimes what happens when you take this mindset, first of all, you'll be less nervous, right? Secondly, you'll be naturally focused on their number one question, which is, how can you help me? That's their number one question. Every single person you meet with is looking to get the answer to how can you help me? And for each person you meet, the answer might be a little bit different, even if it's in the same company, and they're all interviewing you for the same job. Each person is thinking, how can this person help me? In fact, they only have 3 questions. You may think they're asking you all these different types of questions. They all fall into one of these 3 buckets. How can you help me? Why do you want to work here? And will you fit in? So why do you want to work here? Meaning, are you going to stick around or are you going to leave in 6 months? And will you fit in? So no matter what you think they're asking you, it's really one of these 3. So keep this in mind when you prepare it, okay? And I'll get to your question in a second. The last thing I want to mention is sometimes when you take this mindset, you're focusing on their problems and issues and trying to see how you can help them. Sometimes you realize you're not the right fit. Like they want X and you're Y. So what do? You say, listen, it looks like you want Y, I'm X. I know someone who can help you. I'll refer them to you. And by the way, who should I be talking to? Now you know what I can do. It becomes like a networking meeting, right? So even when you take this mindset, even if it's not the right fit, it's like you bring them into your network. We'll talk more about that. That's the attitude you want to take here, okay? Did you have a question?
Quickly, but you don't want to give them too much, like a marketing plan or a proposal, because then they'll just take it and run, right? They won't need you anymore.
We'll get to that. So the question is, you don't want to give them too much, right? Because they'll take it and run, they don't need you. It's 2 different issues, right? You want to, we'll talk, you want to influence the outcome, you want to give them an idea of how you can help them, but I agree, there's a line you don't want to cross, right? And, you know, often, that's a whole other conversation. We'll talk more about that, okay? Yeah.
When I take the internal sales consultant,
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
when I take the internal consulting approach as to how I can help, all I get is feedback as to, you say you can do this, and they don't like it.
I'm sorry, they don't like what don't they like?
They don't like talking about how you can help them. They don't want to hear it.
We'd have to get into more detail, but I guarantee you that's all they care about. They want to know how you can help them. Now, I don't know how you're coming across when you talk to them, and maybe we should let's revisit that, because part of what we're going to talk about is how do you talk to people when you tell them how you can help them? How do you bring that up, right? And you got to bring it up the right way. If you come across as like a know-it-all, and I'm not saying you do, but if you come across that way, they might get turned off, right? Maybe you're saying how you can help them in a way that they don't want help. Maybe you're forcing them, you're saying, I can do this, and they're thinking, we don't need that. But you're telling them, I can do this. I mean, if that's what you're doing, they're not going to like it, right? So let's talk more about that, and you'll see more about how I suggest you should approach sharing how you can help them in very specific detail, and see if it resonates with you, okay? All right. So, all right, any other questions so far? That's the strategy. Any questions on the strategy before we go on to preparation? You all with me so far? Okay, great. Okay, so let's talk about how do you prepare, keeping the strategy in mind. So really you should have like a checklist of things you want to do. And the first thing I would be thinking about is what issues might they have with my candidacy, if any? What do I mean by issues? I mean like maybe, I'm making this up, maybe you got fired from your prior job and they're going to ask you, why'd you leave your current job? And you're like, I hate that question. Should I tell them I got fired? It's so uncomfortable, right? You got to prepare for that proactively. Don't wait till the interview just because you hate dealing with it, right? Or maybe you have a big gap in your experience and you're like, they're going to ask me what I've been doing the past year and all I've been doing is looking for a job. Like, do I tell them that? They're going to think there's something wrong with me. How do I deal with it? You got to deal with it. Do it before you walk into that meeting and come up with a good answer, okay? So, in fact, let's talk about that for a minute before we go into the rest of the checklist here, okay? Does anybody have an issue like that they want to bring up? Yeah, go ahead.
I have exactly that issue because
Which one?
the issue of explaining why I'm not in my job anymore.
Okay, so something happened, you got let go or something like that?
Because I went on medical leave, I had a medical problem, and it was a small business, and they took people that worked there and they split my job up amongst 5 people. It's a nonprofit, so there were volunteers. Anyway, long story short, by the time I was ready to go back, there was no more job.
Okay, how long have you been out of work?
You mean when I went on medical leave?
Yeah, you've been out medically, there was no more job, so how long? Since June, you've not been employed by them? Okay, so that's also, you have a big gap and you left in terms that aren't necessarily appealing to an employer with the medical leave and all that. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Great. So this is a perfect example, okay? And I'm going to use this to illustrate for everybody how you should handle these types of issues. And there are lots of different variations of this, right? So first of all, we're going to talk more about this, but I'm going to bring it up now. I already told you one sort of golden rule of ACE in the interview, which is to keep the focus on how you can help them, right? Using examples from your experience or showing them specifically what you would do when you start the job, right? That's the and asking the right questions to figure out how you can help them. So that's like one golden rule, like keep the focus on how you can help them. So when they're asking you why'd you leave, you're not focusing on how you can help them, right? You have to answer the question, but you're not talking about how you can help them, right? So that's not good. So if you're talking too much about that, number one, you're wasting your time or hurting yourself by the answer, no matter what the answer is, okay? The second rule is keep things as positive as possible. Negativity is a no-no, okay? You got to find a way to reframe things. If they say, do you have experience in X, and you don't, you could say no, or you could say, well, I have experience in Y, which is just like X. Which is better? What was that? The second one part, right? The latter, right? Yes, that's how you want to think. You want to train your brain to think that way. Always try to, they want this is business savviness. They want business savviness. They don't necessarily want the literal truth. They want to know that you'll have their backs when they hire you, okay? So when you're in your situation, are you going to tell them I was on medical leave? I don't think so. I don't think it's a good idea, number one, okay? Because they're going to think, oh, she was on medical. They're going to want to know why. Are you going to get sick again? I mean, that's what any interviewer, you would think that. If you were interviewing somebody and they said, I was on medical leave and you got to know I got to count on them, you'd be sympathetic. You'd be like, oh, that's sad. That's terrible. Some part of you would be thinking, is this person going to get sick after I hire them? You know, I have another one that didn't mention anything about medical leave that I like also, right? So what do? Do you tell them you're on medical leave? I mean, I would say probably not because it's just human nature. It's going to hurt your chances, okay? The other part of it is so you got to come up with something that's not about medical leave, all right? So the other part of it is that you haven't been working since June, right? So what have you been doing, okay? So do you want to say, I've just been looking for a job the entire time since June, so we're talking about 8 months or something like that? That doesn't sound positive. Would you agree? It sounds like you're not good at looking for a job or people are seeing things in you that they don't like, okay? You don't want to bring that up. Are you with me so far? Okay. So what I would do is when they ask you uncomfortable questions like this, your goal is to get back on track, get back onto the agenda you want to be discussing, which is what they want to discuss, which is how can you help them as quickly as possible. You're not doing that right now. You're talking about something different than how can you help them, okay? So I would say something like, look, how long were you at that company? You were there so great. It's great for you. You can say, listen, why did I leave? I was there for 17 years. I had a great run. They loved me. I loved them. I really helped them a lot. You know, I had some family issues I had to take care of, so I took a break. After 17 years, I decided to take a break. And now, don't say I've been looking for a job since June. Say, and now I'm ready to jump back in. And I'm excited to now listen to this, it's very important. And I'm excited to be talking to you and then tell them why you want to work there and ask them a question. Change the subject. Do you see what we just did? We didn't bring up the medical leave. We didn't bring up looking for a job. You don't have to get into that kind of detail. You don't. Just answer it briefly and change the subject back to them. Tell them why you want to work there. Ask them a question to figure out how you can help them. You following me?
I am. The only thing that I'm thinking as you're speaking is, okay, so now they're going to think, well, she's got family problems, so what's the...
They're not going to think that. They're not going to think that. Or they're going to say, I had to take care of some family issues. They're done. They're resolved. Everybody has family issues. You're not saying, I had to take care of some personal health issues. That's a different thing. Family issues could be like a sick parent. That's usually what people think. Like there's somebody sick, or who knows, there's some issue with your kids, or who knows what it is, right? Don't worry about that at all. If you make it personal, like I was sick, that's a whole different thing, okay?
How do you handle it if they start to say, well, what happened? What was your...
They're not going to, you could say, listen, honestly, it's an illegal question. They're never going to ask you that. If they do, you can say, you know what? It's all been resolved. It's sort of personal. It's all been resolved, and change the subject back to them again. Okay? All right. You with me? So do you understand like how to do this? Now I'm sure you all have some variation of this, right? Just try to apply it to your own situation. Okay? And this is a larger point that we're going to be discussing later when we talk about how to handle every single question you get in the interview. We're already introducing the idea here. Okay? So remember those 2 rules, right? Keep the focus on how you can help them and keep things as positive as possible. Negativity will never help you. Okay? Now, yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, how can you prepare yourself to tell them? How can you help them?
How? I'm going to show you. We're going to get to that. Okay? If I don't get to that in this way that is satisfactory, ask me again. Okay? But I think we're going to address it. All right? So that's the first thing, how to handle issues they might have with your candidacy. Now, what questions do you want to ask them? Okay, we're going to talk about that in a second. You want to come up with 2 or 3 success stories, examples from your experience that I'm going to challenge you to get at least one of those stories heard in every interview you have with every single person. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Your 2-minute pitch, we're going to delve into that. That's the answer to any open-ended question, like tell me about yourself, tell me about your experience, tell me about your background, and why do you want to work there, right? You really want to do that because that's going to address your motivation. Remember we talked about that? And maybe even your fit, okay? Which they want to know, that you're going to fit in, and they're going to want to know that you're motivated, that you're going to stick around and not leave in 6 months. So let's go through the questions you want to ask, the success stories, and the 2-minute pitch in more detail. So the questions you want to ask. Now, here's the big picture. The big picture is I want you to be like Sherlock Holmes, like an investigator. I don't want you to think like, what are the 3 questions I can ask to show them how brilliant I am? I don't want you to think that way. Forget that, okay? What I want you to think is, I got to figure out how I can help them, just like a consultant would do. I got to figure out how I can help them, what they need help with. So what questions can I ask to figure that out? Any question you ask that's going to help you to understand how you can help them is a great question. And by the way, in the process, they'll be impressed with your questions, okay? But that's not the point here. The point is for you to understand how you can help them through your questions. You with me on this? That's the big picture here, okay? So to come up with good questions to learn how you can help them, what you should do is before you even go into an interview, you should find out who you're meeting with. So a lot of times somebody will set up an interview, say, come in on this day, and they don't even tell you who you're meeting with, right? You have no idea, and you just go in, and all of a sudden it's like 5 people you didn't even know, right? What I would do, and if any of you are in that situation right now, you should contact the person who set up the interview, the admin or whoever, and say, look, I know I'm supposed to come in on Tuesday, next Tuesday. I'm curious, just so I can prepare to show how I can help, it would really be helpful to me if you could share with me who I'm meeting with and what they do. They'll tell you 99% of the time. Once you know who you're meeting with, and you look them up on LinkedIn or Google them, and then you start to figure out, like, what might they be interested in? Let's talk about this. Like, say you're going in to meet, I'm making this up. Say you're going in for a marketing director role. So you're going to meet the VP of marketing, who's going to be your boss. You're going to meet the chief marketing officer, who's the head of marketing, like the boss's boss. You're going to meet the head of sales or a sales director. You're going to meet an IT person and a finance person, an HR, right? Each one of those people has a little bit of a different answer to the question, how can you help me, that they're looking for. Now, and you got to figure out ahead of time, like, what might they be interested in? I'm just going to make this up now, right? So your immediate boss, the VP of marketing, is thinking, well, can they do the job? Can they do the campaigns? Like your hypothesis is they need me to develop and execute marketing campaigns. I'm making this up, all right? So they're going to your guess is they probably have a bunch of campaigns they want me to develop and run. So that might be a question. What types of campaigns do you run? Is that what you need me to do, right? Those are the questions you would ask, right? The chief marketing officer, who's your boss's boss, is thinking more strategically, right? They're the big picture, right? They're in charge of everything. So you might be thinking, like, what's your vision for marketing here? How do you see marketing evolving long term? Or what? You might think more ask questions to CMO that are more big picture strategic, right? The salesperson is thinking, will this marketing person give me what I need to run sales campaigns? Maybe, or to go out and sell. So you might ask the salesperson, how can I best support your sales efforts? Right? The IT person's thinking, oh, is this person going to be demanding too many information technology enhancements going to drive us crazy, that we can't do? So you're going to just be talking about, like, how can we best work together? Just whatever it is, right? You're thinking about everything a little bit differently. The questions are all a little different. That's how you need to be thinking. Each person is unique, and the questions might be a little bit different. And your things that you want to share with them, your examples might be slightly different, or maybe it's the same example talked about in a slightly different way for each person. Are you with me on this? Okay. By the way, everything I'm sharing with you right now is what, like, the best salesperson in the world would do. They always start with the audience, like what's going to resonate with the audience. And then they tailor their sales pitch accordingly, right? That's what we're doing here, is just that, okay? So that's what you need to do. So the next point is very important, like research to understand what the issues are that they might be interested in is very important. So once you know who you're meeting with, look up their LinkedIn profiles. Check out the organization website for, maybe their bios. It depends. They may not be on it depends how big the company is, right? Or how senior they are. But like maybe, what you can do is even look at the issues that the company is facing. You might see it in their press releases that the company has, or you might see it if it's a public company. You click on the little investors link on the homepage of the public company, and then you get to see all the analyst presentations that are done quarterly. They have them all on there. They have sometimes recordings, and you can really see what the issues are and how they're dealing with those issues in those presentations to analysts. You can Google, right? Do the easy stuff. Just Google the company, Google the people, online trade journals. You get the idea, right? Blogs, all that stuff, okay? Other websites. I have a bunch of research resources on my website too. If you go to hellmanconsulting.com and you click resources, the resources tab, you'll see a bunch of resources that can help you research organizations, companies. It might help you as well in terms of figuring out what their issues might be and what types of questions you want to ask and what types of examples you want to share of your success. Okay, so the questions you might want to ask, right? I write here anything that will help you to understand what their issues are or how to follow up and make the sale, right? I put sale in quotes, right? But that's really what it is here. So give me an example of a question that you might ask anybody. Does anybody have one? Like just sort of an obvious question here if you're thinking about it the way I am. Yeah.
Let's say it's a pharma company. Can you ask about
A what company?
a pharma company?
Okay.
Can you ask them about the impact of IPI pricing? Can you ask them about a business factor?
If that's the department, so the question is if it's like a pharma company, can you ask them about something specific about their pricing, for example, right? If it's the right department and the right person, it might make sense. It might not make any sense if it's someone that doesn't care about that. I don't know if IT cares about that, for example. If you're interviewing in IT, I don't know. If marketing, they might care about that, right? It depends. But you're thinking in the right way. Like you're thinking about, but you just think, always remember, you got to think of the audience. But there's some just sort of very basic questions you would ask. Yeah.
Can you ask, like, how does my role, like, I understand my role, but how does my role help you and your team with what they're doing? Or we have to be prepared already know what that position requires?
No, I think you could say, you can read the posting if there was a posting, but you might, so the question is, can I say, can I ask, like, how does my role help you and your team, right? Okay. I think you may already they might expect you to know something if there's a posting. If there is no posting and you really don't know, that's a great question, right? It depends, okay? But even at the most basic level, I would ask, like, what are your biggest challenges that I can help with? Is that sort of like an obvious question you'd want to know? Like if you're trying to figure out how can I help, you basically want to say, how can I help, right? What are your biggest challenges, right? Go ahead.
That's a very similar question to what are my duties and responsibilities.
Yeah, but I would think about it. So you're saying, what are my duties and responsibilities, right? That's good, But even better, take it one step further and say, use words like, how can I help? Everybody wants help. So instead of saying duties and responsibilities, it's more, when you think that way, duties and responsibilities, you're thinking about, it's like a step removed from helping. It's not so much like, you're not focusing on how you can help them, you're focusing on duties and responsibilities. It's a little bit different, okay? So it's pretty good, but ideally you want to focus on how can you help, okay? You know, how can I help you short term, right away, day one? How about 6 months down the road or a year down the road, right? These are sort of obvious questions. Like, what are the characteristics of people who succeed in this role? So now you get a better sense of what they need, what's going to help them if you learn these things, right? What works and what doesn't work. You might want to ask, like, did somebody leave or is this a new position? If they say somebody left, you might want to find out why. And you might say, just so I understand what you're looking for and how I can help, could you tell me why this person left? Right? Just phrase it and think about it all in terms of how you can help them, okay? How will my success be measured? That's a really important thing to understand. Would you agree? A year from now, how are we going to know I've been successful a year after you hire me? I'd want to know that. You should know that before you take the job. Yeah.
Once you find out if the person, someone left from the company and that's why you're interviewing, can you ask maybe something along the lines of what is that person working on any major projects that they left open or not completed?
Yeah, you could. So the question is, if so you found out somebody left and you're taking their position, you could say, is there anything I'll be picking up that they worked on? That's a reasonable question, absolutely. Yeah, sure. How will my success be measured? Who will I be interacting with? Like, who's going to depend on me? Who am I going to depend on? Just to say, then you could say, oh, I've worked with those people before, just to understand how they're expecting you to help, right? And how you're going to be able to do your job and help them. What does a typical day look like? Now, that's the kind of question, like, if you're still not, listen, you can ask these questions in any way that feels comfortable for you, but I just want to give you ideas of, like, how you can get an understanding of what the value is that they're looking for you to add, okay? And so what does a typical day look like? That's like if you're not understanding it already. If you're still not clear, you might say, am I going to be in meetings 2/3 of the time, or is it more that's only going to be a small part? Or can you give me an example of a typical day? You don't have to ask that question. But now, and then there's a whole other layer of questions you want to ask that's based on your research about the company, like looking at the investor section and looking at the website. So you were mentioning before over there about pricing, right? Like, that's the next layer. That's based on your research and your knowledge about the company and about what they do in relation to what the company does, right? You want to ask those types of questions too, get more specific, right? So I understand, if you're taught, like, to take the marketing example, you could say, I understand a competitor launched a new product that seems to be very competitive with what you're offering. Am I going to work on an answer to that? Like, that's the kind of thing, right? That's a hypothesis that you had, and they might say, no, we don't care about that. Or they might say, yes, right? And now you're asking a really good question. You're learning about how you can help them, okay? So do you get, like, these are questions. So this is not about, like, showing how smart you are or anything like that. It's really about your mission here, which is learning how you can help them, so then you can show them how you can help them. If you can show them how you can help them, you're doing it really, really well, right? And if you're showing them how you can help them better than other people, then you're doing as good as you can possibly do. But you can't show them how you can help them until you thoroughly understand what they need. Okay, that's what the questions are for. Are you with me on this? So, any questions? Yes.
I actually asked, like, the last question in an interview, and they responded saying, I don't know, because I don't actually work there, I just hire people. And I just, like, that was just, like, an awkward little moment, and I wasn't able to, like, bring it positive. Like, what do you suggest, like, if that ever happens again?
Okay, which question are you talking about?
What does a typical day look like for me? Like,
All right, so was this like an HR person or something, and
for, like, a laboratory, like, research.
a research, and then you ask somebody that doesn't really work in that department?
The person just hired people for, it was like Quest Diagnostics.
Okay, so you got to know who you're talking to, right? So, there's two things I want to say about that, right? So the question is, just so everybody heard it, right? So you said that you asked a question like, what does a typical day look like? They said, I don't know, because I'm just hiring people, but I'm not clear on the details, basically. So then it felt awkward to you, right? Okay, so first off, it shouldn't feel awkward to you. You don't know. It's like, okay, great. You know, but the second thing I want to say, there's no problem with that. It's no problem. So what can they tell you about it? You know, what do they know anything about the role? Like, is there anything you could tell me about the department? Just ask a more general question, right? Just pivot to that. Like, if you're thinking about learning how you can help them, this won't feel awkward to you. You know, it won't feel awkward to you because you're just trying to understand. If you're just clear in your head, I'm on the same side of the table as them, just trying to learn how I can help them. Then they're like, okay, you don't know what a typical day looks like? Well, what do you know? What can you tell me? You just pivot to that, and it's not awkward, right? The second thing, are you with me on this? Okay. The second thing I want to say about that, though, is you should do your research and really understand who you're talking to. And like they may not, and maybe through that research, you might say, you know what, that's not a great question for them. They may not be that close. You might even say something like, look, I don't know how close you are to the job. I'm curious as to what a typical day looks like. Do you have any sense of that? And they might say no. You know, you might not even ask that question based on your research. Does that help? Okay.
Ask them like, oh, could you direct me to someone else that can like answer that question like in the appointment? Or...
Well, aren't you going to have I hope you're going to talk to, this is not the person you're going to work for, right? Well, hopefully you're going to you're going to interview with the person you work for. They're going to tell you what a typical day looks like, right? So I don't think you need to ask, can you direct me to somebody? If you do well with the interview, I guess they'll move you forward, right, into the process, and then you'll be able to ask that question. Okay? Right. So is that, any other questions on questions? Yeah.
Is it appropriate to ask what's the worst day like?
What's the worst day like? Well, this is where we were talking about like negativity is a no-no. So the word worst has a very negative connotation. Maybe people don't think of it like worst. You know, they're like, I like my job. I don't think of things like a worst day. And I wouldn't bring up those kind of words. I wouldn't use those kinds of words in an interview, like worst day.
Busiest day maybe? That way I can go prepare. Like, because I'm sure, like, not in every job, but I'm sure you have a typical day, but then I'm sure there are days when it's the busiest, and that way.
You know, I think, you're asking me a question like, can you ask what's the busiest day like? I think that depends on the job. Like if you're in a call center, if you're looking to be customer service, I could imagine some days are going to be super busy and some days aren't. You might ask, what's it like when it gets really busy? Like, what do you do in those situations? Now, if you're doing something entirely different, like you're a business analyst, it doesn't really make sense to say, what's the busiest day like? It's just like you analyze, you know, you just get in it. You have to do analyses and there's always deadlines and it doesn't make sense to ask that question. So I think that's the kind of question that would make sense for some roles and not for others. So, okay? Any other questions on questions, or should we? Yeah.
Can you ever ask about vacation?
I would, great question. The question is, can you ever ask about vacation, okay? Your job in an interview is to get the offer. I mean, ultimately, right? In each interview, you want to have another meeting, right? I told you to get the next meeting, and ultimately, you want to get the offer, right? Your job in the interview process is to sell yourself. If you ask about vacation, are you selling yourself? Are you? No, I'm just curious. No, right? You're not. Would you agree?
I felt like you had to be really honest what's important for you when you. I did not.
Okay. No, I understand. It's
I understand what you wanted to say. The idea is to get an offer.
yeah.
And then you can negotiate.
That is exactly right. Did you hear that? That is exactly the right approach. Get the offer, then ask the tough questions. Ask about vacation. Ask about anything else. Then you can be really discerning. And that's a whole other conversation about negotiation, right? That's a whole other seminar. But that's the time to really scrutinize what you're getting yourself into. Make sure you understand their expectations and that you're set up for success and the offer, the vacation's right and the benefits are right and the compensation's right. That's when you negotiate that stuff. Right now, just get the offer, okay? That's the goal here. Yes?
If you get the opposite, like they ask you,
Ask you what?
like vacation,
They ask you what you want, right? We're going to get to that. I'll tell you how to address it.
well, not that what you want, but they're not even making the offer of the job, but they're asking that during the interview process.
They're asking you, what are you looking for? We're going to get to that. Okay? I promise you I'm going to address that. Okay? I'll tell you exactly how to deal with it. Okay, let's keep moving because we have a lot to cover. Okay? So the next thing I want to talk about is the answer to any open-ended question. tell me about yourself, tell me about your experience, tell me about your background, anything like that, okay? Even why should we hire you? Sometimes you'll get a question like that. Each of these questions, there's lots of ways to answer it, okay? If they say, tell me about your background, do they want to know, like, I was born in a log cabin? Like, they don't care, right? You know, they don't want to know that. They want to know, how can you help me? Why do you want to work here? And will you fit in? That's what they want to know, right? So this is an opportunity. Okay, in 1 second. This is an opportunity to rehearse something that is going to impress them to answer these open-ended questions. Let me just say, the reason they ask these open-ended questions is they don't know what to ask you. They're like, listen, impress me. Just say something to impress me so you have the opportunity to talk. Talk for 2 minutes. Give them a really good answer. They're wanting that, right? Quite honestly, a really good interviewer will not ask a question like that. They will ask very specific questions about your experience, and they'll ask for examples of your experience that relate to what they need help with. That's what the best interviewers do, right? People that aren't as experienced in interviewing will ask these open-ended questions because they don't know what to ask. So you take the bull by the horns. You say, they don't know what to ask. I'm going to tell them something that's going to really impress them, that's going to show them how I can help them. That's your 2-minute pitch, and that's what we're going to talk about right now, okay? Do you have a question?
So you said you don't want us to talk about the negatives, but like, what happens if you're on an interview and they're asking?
Oof, that's bad. Go ahead. Keep talking.
They're asking for like 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses. How do you want to approach like the weaknesses?
If they're asking for 3 strengths and 3 weaknesses, I promise you, I'm going to address that, okay? Hopefully this computer still works. 1 second here. Oh my God. That has never happened in a presentation before, but so far so good. It's only water, it'll dry. If it was coffee, that would be a real problem. Yeah. Anyway, I could do this by heart if we need to. You got all the slides there. So, all right. But we're going to get to the weaknesses. I'm going to teach you how to answer all these questions. Okay? All right. So let me talk about the pitch. Okay? All right. It worked. So far so good. So now, your pitch, I'm going to tell you how to give a 2-minute pitch. That's the answer to any of these open-ended questions. Okay? Now, I want you to, it's something you're going to rehearse, you're going to practice. I want you to make it conversational, not like you're reading a script, right? It's got to be like it's natural. And if you do your pitch the right way, it can really elevate the conversation. It can really impress people. I've seen it happen in my own career. Clients have given me that feedback too, okay? So you really take that opportunity to create this pitch. And this pitch is going to be a concise statement essentially about how you can help them and what differentiates you from the competition that's really going to impress them. And so here are the elements of your 2-minute pitch. Now, by the way, there are lots of different pitches. There's a 5-second pitch. There's a 20-second pitch. There's a 30-second pitch. There's a 2-minute pitch. It depends on the different situation you're in. In networking meetings and all this stuff. We're talking about the interview. That's the 2-minute pitch. That's when they're saying, please talk, essentially, right? Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your background, okay? So the 2-minute pitch, you see 2 minutes over there? It's all these elements. You start off with a powerful hook, something that's going to grab their attention, that's going to hook them, okay? Because think of it like your 2 minutes is like you're getting an opportunity to tell a little story about yourself. And you want to wake them up. They're interviewing all these people. It's like, oh, here's another person. I'm exhausted. Tell them something interesting. Grab their attention. Okay, I'm going to give you some examples. Okay, and by the way, I do a whole workshop just in the 2-minute pitch, and we don't have time for that. But I want you to get started on thinking about these things. So I'm going to give you some of the ideas. If we have time at the end, maybe we'll delve into this a little bit more. But think about your branding, your hook. What's going to grab their attention? Then how they should categorize you, meaning what box are you in the organizational chart? Are you a customer success manager? Are you an information technology director of IT? Are you a marketing analyst? Are you a creative director? Or what are you, right? Are you administrative assistant? Whatever you are, just say it, right? Get that out there. What differentiates you? Maybe it's the number of years of experience. Maybe it's the things you've worked on. Maybe it's the places you've worked, drop names that they know. Maybe it's just some of the great accomplishments you've had, right? Which leads to the next thing, examples to back it up. come up with 2 or 3 examples. And these examples should tie into the success stories you're going to tell. Remember I mentioned success stories before? These are like teasers in the pitch. Like you're going to give a whole, I want you to, remember before I said I challenge you to get at least one of your success stories heard in every meeting you have, in every interview, right? Now, you can introduce those stories in your pitch so they'll maybe want to ask you more about them. Okay, so you might say something like, for example, in my most recent role, I did X, which resulted in Y. Oh, and they'll be like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. Then you give them the whole story. But in the pitch, it's that simple. It's just, I did X, which resulted in Y. I did, in my prior job, I did A, which resulted in B. And I also did C, which resulted in D. That's what I mean by examples. Like very short, very concise, like teasers. Think of them as teasers just to get them to ask you more about this example so you can tell them the whole story. You with me so far, just in the concept here? Then underlying your success is something like, and I think the reason I've done well in my career is because I really know how to motivate a team, or it's because I'm great at building relationships, or it's because, the bottom line is I'm an out-of-the-box thinker, so I come up with solutions that are not easily obvious to a lot of people. Whatever it is for you, like bring it to conclusion, okay? In terms of the value you can add. And lastly, turn it back to them. And I'm excited to be talking to you because, and then tell them why you want to work there and ask them a question. You with me? That's the pitch. And so let's go into a little bit more detail about all these elements, okay? So I'm going to talk about the first one, the branding, right? Okay, this is examples from client examples of the kinds of things they came up with. So I had a client who was a business analyst, and the way he initially started off his pitch is he said something like, well, I've been a business analyst for the past 6 years. I have lots of experience in business analysis, including modeling and statistics and whatever. Right? Nothing wrong with that. It's fine, right? But I said, listen, let's take it up a notch because I really want them to get interested in you. Like, what's the essence of the value you provide? And he said, well, what I do is I turn data into actionable insights that can drive the business forward. I said, that's how you want to start your pitch. It's more interesting, right? So they say, tell me about yourself. Well, in my career, my whole career has been about turning data into actionable knowledge that drives the business, right? Isn't that a little bit more interesting than just going right into, I've been a business analyst for the past 6 years? That's the next thing he said. I've been a business analyst. I've been doing this for the past 6 years as a business analyst. And see, then he goes into the rest of it. You following me? Okay. This is, by the way, the hardest part of the pitch because you got to be a little creative here, right? So the next one, I was talking to a risk analyst, a risk underwriter in an insurance industry. I said the same question. I said, what's the essence of your value? What do you do? He said, really, ultimately, what do you do? Don't just tell me I've been an insurance risk analyst and underwriter for the past X years. And good, but second, not first. The first thing he said is, I see my role as turning uncertainty into opportunity. Okay, interesting. I want to hear more. That's something that's going to wake people up, right? I had a client who was focusing on private equity energy firms, right? So she said, they were saying, like, tell me about your background, tell me about your experience. She could have said, well, I have experience in blah, blah, blah. She just said, I'm an energy insider. I'm an energy insider. And then she went to the rest of her pitch, okay? Another client who was in talent development or learning and development, she said, instead of saying like, I have X years of experience in learning and development, and right, she said, when they said, tell me about yourself, she said, well, I view organizational learning as a journey, and my role is to provide the map to show the organization how to get to that learning destination. All right, interesting, right? Do you agree with me? Right? Okay. Here, I want to go through all these because it's just so hard. It's hard to do this, and I want you to be inspired to do this for yourself. Okay? So, in 1 second. So, I had a guy who was in technology, an information technology director. He started off, I've been an IT administrator. I've been doing this, and I've been IT for 15 years. I said, why are you great? What makes you great at what you do? He said, I can make PCs dance. I said, perfect. That's what you're going to say at the start of your pitch, right? Similarly, I had a research chemist. It's not on here. He said, I had a guy who was a research chemist. He said, I can catalyze anything. I can catalyze any reaction, right? That's how he started his pitch. I had another client. She was, it's not even on here. She was a creative consultant, sort of like an interim creative director. And she said, my clients tell me I get their brands better than they themselves do. That's how she started off her pitch. Okay? So I'm giving you homework, right? What is the essence of your value? Okay? And we can come back to this later if we have time. I don't think we will because there's so much great stuff I want to share with you. But I think you're getting the idea, right? Who had a question? Somebody? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. There was somebody back there.
Yeah, so when you say any of that, sometimes it's a turnoff from what I've experienced.
If it's BS, it'll be a turnoff. I don't think any of this is BS. I think it's all real. It's true. This is what I turn data into actionable knowledge is BS to you.
I'm an energy insider.
If you're not an energy insider, it's BS. If you're an energy insider, it's exactly what you want them to know. And then you have to back it up. Show them how you're an energy insider. Okay? Yes?
What if you're like going into a new industry and you don't have the experience for that industry, but you've been something else? How do you plan to go into a new industry?
It's a great question. So what if you are going into a new industry and you don't have the experience, right? So how do you talk about it, yourself in a way that'll appeal to them, right? Look, let's just for a second, this might be useful. Tell me, is this your situation?
I just graduated with my master's in accounting, but I don't have any practical experience in accounting because I did undergrad in culinary.
So you want to go, where do you want to work? In an accounting department or you want to work in a CPA firms, right? So what do you want to tell them? Do you want to say you don't want to say I have culinary experience, they don't care, right? So what do you want to talk about the things you do have? You want to talk about the things you do have. You could say, I know every aspect of something about accounting that very few people know. I'm just making something up. Maybe that's how you start off, right? Because maybe you got that expertise from your schooling. You can say that, right? You can't say I have experience in it, but you can say I have expertise in it. I'm an expert in, I don't know what. I don't know much about accounting, cost accounting, whatever it is, right? And I have knowledge in pretty much every aspect of accounting your firm deals with. That's sort of interesting, right? Or do better than that. But talk about what you do have that would appeal to them. Does that sort of answer your question? Or okay, all right. Any questions, other questions about how to start off your pitch? Is this resonating with people or? Yeah, okay. So I'm challenging you. This is the hardest part. Come up with it. Now, if you can't come up with something good, don't worry about it. It's not the end of the world, right? You could just go with the old boring way, like I have X years of experience doing whatever, right? It's not the end of the world, right? But try, okay? It'll be more interesting. Okay. Now, another way to think about the rest of the pitch. Now, if you do your resume the right way, and this is not a resume seminar today, but you will have a really powerful summary section at the top of your resume that is essentially the same thing as your pitch. So if you create a good summary section at the top of your resume, you can use that summary section almost as an outline for what you say in your 2-minute pitch. So here's an example, right? So this is a finance director, right? So you could see this is a top of a resume that I put together with a client who was going for a finance director role at a big media company, right? So you could see, now you don't have that hook in the resume. You don't say, sometimes you can put that in there, but in this case, no, okay? So you see here, remember I talked to you about step 2 in the pitch? Here, let's go back here. Step 1 is branding and hook. Step 2 is how they should categorize you. 3 is what differentiates you. 4 is examples to back it up. 5, underlining your success, right? This top of the summary section of your resume can have all those things, should have all those things. So, how to categorize me? Finance director, right? What differentiates me? All these things. Worked at big media companies, Viacom, NBC Universal, HarperCollins. I have M&A experience and global staff leadership and FP&A experience. What examples to back it up? That's here, right? The greatest hits, like key role in turning profit from negative 10% to plus 15%. And that's a great example to throw in your pitch, right? They'll know that might be your story. I had a key role, right, in turning profitability around from negative 10% to plus 15%. Then they'll say, oh, tell me about that. I want to hear more. Then you tell them your whole story, okay, which we're going to talk about next, right? So then the fifth thing is underlying your success or how viewed by others, right? So in this case, we did it like in terms of like he had some good or she had some good LinkedIn recommendations and performance reviews. So we pulled out a few quotes from that, like thought leader. And I think you could say, I think people would describe me as, this is how she ended her pitch. Like, I think people would describe me as a thought leader who, as well as a team player who is able to motivate a team and collaborate well or something like that. That's a good conclusion for your pitch, right? And then you tell them why you want to work there, right? So just to give you an idea about how these things interact, like you want to use the same messaging in every marketing channel of your job search, whether it's your pitch, whether it's your resume, whether it's your emails, your cover letters. It should be the same pitch. It should be the same message. You want that repetition. You want that repetition. Repetition is good. I'll repeat myself. Repetition is good because it cements the message. It makes it more memorable. You need to say it over and over again in different channels for them to remember. Okay? So now, if I wanted to just look at this, I could probably create a pitch just from this. I'm just doing this now. I didn't rehearse this, okay? So I'm just going to read this and say, so they said to me, tell me about myself, right? Tell me about yourself. No, I don't have that hook. I'm not prepared with that, right? So I'm just going to go, well, look, I have over 10 years of experience as a finance director in the media industry. I've worked in some big media companies, including Viacom, NBC Universal, and HarperCollins. I also am a CFA charter holder, which might interest you. I have M&A experience, FP&A experience, and also a lot of experience with global staff leadership. Let me give you a couple of examples so you can see how I can help you. So when in my most recent role, I had a key role in a restructuring that turned around profitability from negative 10% to plus 15%. I actually was recognized for that achievement. I received an award for outstanding performance. Prior to that, I had an opportunity to reduce costs by as much as 25%, through my ability to protect and enhance revenue sources. Happy to tell you about that if you're interested. And just another example, I've been involved in dozens of mergers and acquisitions. I can give you an example of any one of them, and I've have expertise across all facets of M&A. And I think if you talk to people about me and ask them about me, they would say I'm a thought leader. I'm someone who sees the big picture, who can also act in a very tactical way as well, in addition to seeing strategically what to do. And I'm someone who can collaborate well and motivate a team. And I think those are the reasons I've been successful. And I'm excited to be talking to you because, and then tell them why you want to work there. So you can see I was just sort of improvising, right? That's how you do it. I made it conversational. You don't just read it like a script. Okay, write it out, memorize it. So take an hour to memorize it. And you just read it over and over and over again until it's totally conversational, until it's in your head. If you can sleep on it the next day, it'll be really in there. Okay? And use those, make it conversational, and try to use words like you, like this might be interesting to you, or something like that, if you can, to make it more relevant to them. Any questions on the pitch? You good with it? All right. So, one last thing. When you're giving your pitch, there's some sort of general principles about whenever you're talking and sharing, like your pitch is almost like a mini presentation. You're basically giving a presentation on yourself for 2 minutes. Okay, it's like a 2-minute pitch. Now, if you're talking for much less than 2 minutes, like a minute, you're probably not giving enough detail. It's probably not that interesting. If you're talking a lot more than 2 minutes, you're probably giving too much detail. It might be too much jargon. It might get boring. They might get lost in it. I think 2 minutes roughly, give or take, is a good amount of time for your pitch, right? Some other things to think about. Now, this isn't, I don't, I'm mentioning this, my book here only because this is the heart of my book about presentations. To forget, you don't have to buy my book. I don't care about that, right? But it's about these principles. It's the same principle as if you were giving a presentation. You want to keep it really simple, right? Not make it too complicated, your pitch. Keep it as simple as possible so they'll understand it right away. Don't throw in jargon that they're not going to understand. Okay, that's a mistake people make. Make it engaging, like maybe that's when you might use the words you, and you might be interested in this. Bring them into it, okay? Stories, introduce your stories in there. So they'll ask you more about those things, and then you tell the whole story. Make it show how you can be useful to them through your pitch. Licensed means show that you are an authority. Show that could be from like how many years of experience you have. It could be like from your coursework in accounting, like your expertise, like talk about that. Like show that you are an authority, right? Tailor it to the situation. That's where it's like becomes like 2 minutes, right? Not like 10 minutes if they ask you a question like this. Now, surprising, that's a whole other thing that's about presentations. You just don't have an opportunity to bring surprise into your 2-minute pitch, but usually. But anyway, just keep that in mind. Now I want to get to stories, which is if I had to pick one thing that's going to help you the most in terms of improving your odds of getting an offer, I would say it's telling a great story. Okay? So here's what I mean by a story. What I'm talking about is examples from your experience. Now let me just say why stories. The point is to make your experience come alive. And you do that through examples because we're wired as human beings to remember the imagery that comes from stories, from examples. This is how our brains work. That's why we get engrossed in movies or books that we like. It's the same idea. It's storytelling. Now, you can tell a story in 2 ways. You can tell a story about things you've done in the past. You can also tell a story about what you would do for them. Like, here's what I would do in the first 30 days or 90 days or whatever, right? Sometimes that is exactly the right thing to do. Very often, though, you don't want to do that because they might say something like, oh, we tried that already. It won't work. Or, that'll never work in this organization. Or, no, forget that. That's too politically sensitive. Like, you don't know the company well or the organization well enough to be able to make statements like that. But sometimes I might even ask you about it. And then you can be prepared to tell them, and it'll make your experience come alive by talking about the future, right? But always, always you can talk about the past and make your experience come alive in a way that's going to resonate for them. So you got to pick the right stories, the stories that are going to resonate with them. Is this concept making sense here? About like, right? Stories that's what we remember. Giving examples makes things memorable. So you don't have to have 15 different stories. You can come up with 2 or 3 stories. That's plenty. And the reason I say not 15 is because I want you to practice these stories. I want you to get really good at telling these stories. And if you have a lot of stories, you're not going to be able to practice them all. And I've seen it with clients. Like they have too many stories. They just don't have the time. And every story sounds sort of superficial. It's not that interesting. And you don't need more than 3. It's enough to show that you're not a one-trick pony. So they're not going to say, oh, she told you that story. She told me the same story. Nobody says that, right? It just doesn't happen because I've been doing this a long time. If you have 3 different stories, it's enough to vary it among all the people you're meeting with, okay? And that way you can really find the time to practice these and get really good at these stories. Make sure these stories are relevant. Don't tell them a story that has nothing to do with what they want you to do, okay? You want to practice them. You want to introduce them in your pitch, as we talked about. And you try to, now this is super important. We're going to get into this. You want to try to use these stories to answer every question you get, okay? So the way, and we'll get to that more specifically in a moment, okay? Now, the way you want to tell a story, I'm going to give you a format, okay? The format, now there are lots of ways to tell success story formats. I like PAR because it's super simple because these 3 elements are in every good story that you've ever seen in a movie, you've ever read in a book. The problem you faced, the action you took, and the result. PAR. Okay? Problem, action, result. So when you're telling your story, you want to make sure you're bringing out these 3 elements. And just like any great story you saw in a movie or you read in a book. You want to make that story, that example, dramatic. Make it engaging. Make it important. Make it emotional. Like grab their attention. Wake them up. Make their day more interesting because they met you in a good way, not in a bad way, right? So that's what you want to go for. So we're gonna go through a couple examples in a second, okay? But I'm just giving you the overview here. Now, common mistakes when people give these examples, these stories, is, for example, one thing is they get into too much detail, becomes too long, too boring, okay? Or it's just like the pitch, right? Too much jargon, they're not following, they don't understand the acronyms, they're getting lost. You don't want that either, right? There's something called the curse of knowledge. You can Google it. It's like a whole thing where it's a human tendency to assume people know what you know. You got to be careful not to assume that, and make sure you're talking in a way that's going to resonate with your audience. So you always have to, like just any good salesperson, you need to start with your audience and make sure your stories, your pitch, what you're telling them is going to resonate with your audience, okay? That's how you overcome the curse of knowledge. Too little detail just makes your story not interesting, not memorable. Okay. If you use we too much, this is a common issue with people who try to give these examples. They say, well, we did this, and then we did that, and then we did this other thing, and we. We is good up to a point. Like you want to show you can work with other people, but you got to bring in I. They're not hiring we, they're hiring you. So they got to see what you did. So you got to find a way, even if you did it as part of a team, you got to say, I worked with my colleagues. Say it that way, I, so they could see what you did. Yeah.
I get feedback from say you keep on telling what you can do and what you did in the I form, obviously, and they don't like that. Is it just person to person? I mean,
I don't know where you're getting this feedback. What I can tell you is I'm sorry you're getting this. I can just tell you that we have to have a bigger conversation. I'm sure there's more to it than what you're just saying that I just can't get in this short time frame. But you've got to say what you did. Now, if you're taking credit for things that seem unrealistic, that's where they may be getting pushback. Like you're saying, I rebuilt this company. Yeah, but you're like just this lowly analyst, and isn't the CEO the one who's supposed to say that? Then they might be saying, hey, there's a problem there, right? So that's why you and I would need to talk more. I don't know what's going on here, but you got to say what you did. They want to hire, they want to know. They have to know, or they're not going to hire you. If you just say we, they don't get what you did. Well, did you have a tiny role in that or a big role? They don't know. Okay. Are people with me on this? Okay. So, okay. Now, another issue, okay? Forget to tie the problem and the result to the bottom line. So this is really important. Like when you're telling your story, you want to remember, you want to make it dramatic. You want to make it engaging. You want to make it important. You want to show what you did was really important. Okay? So the best way to do that is to tie it to like the bottom line. If it's revenue, talk about the revenue that was at stake, or what the opportunity to make more revenue that you had a key role in, or something like that. Lastly, people sometimes they'll say, here was the problem. You give a really great description of the big issue, and then you say, so then anyway, I did some stuff, and the result was it was great. You know, you didn't talk about the action. You didn't take them on your journey. They want to understand what you did. This is your opportunity to show them how you operate in an organization. So make sure you don't give too little attention to the action and problem, action, result. Okay, just to give you an example. So I had a client who, she was a relationship manager, a customer relationship manager, and one of her stories was, so she started to tell me the story. She said, Rob, I have an example, I have a story, tell me what you think. So she said, well, you know, I was a relationship manager at my most recent company, and I found out this client was thinking of leaving us and going to a competitor. So I found out why they were leaving us and why they were thinking of leaving us. And I was able to come up with a proposal with my team, and we presented the proposal to them, and ultimately got them to stay. That was her story, right? It's like, it's okay, not bad, but it could be way, way better, right? Way more interesting. I don't know how much that's going to it's sort of interesting, but it's not enough to really be memorable. So when we got done with this story, it was more like the following. So she started off again. She said, here, I'll give you an example of how I help. Because the question might have been like, give me an example of how you've worked with clients. She said, sure, here's my example. So one client, I was working with this client who'd been with us since the start of the company, so for 8 years. And I managed key accounts, so I was managing this key account. They were giving us a quarter of our revenue. And because I had so many great relationships with people all over this company, the account company, I heard through the grapevine that they were talking to a competitor and they were thinking of leaving. And as soon as I heard this, I was like really alarmed because they were giving us a quarter of our revenue still. And if they left, it would have been devastating to our company. The company at that time was trying to get bought, and no investor in that scenario would have wanted to look at us. So it was so important that we did whatever we could to keep this client. That was the problem. Do you see how much better the problem is when you describe it that way? Doesn't it sound way more important than just saying, oh, this big account was thinking of leaving? That's what you need to go for. You're tying it to the bottom line. You with me so far? Okay. Now she went into the action. So then she said, all right, so there was this big problem. So now you're, by the way, in the problem, you're showing how important your role is too. Like she's demonstrating to the interviewer like she had a really important role, an important job. It was a big deal. They entrusted her with a lot of responsibility. So then she said, all right, so here's what I did. So the way I approached this challenging issue of keeping this client was I said, I had to learn, there are 3 things I did. First, I had to figure out exactly why they were thinking of leaving. What was the issue? What was the competitor offering that we couldn't offer? The second thing I would have had to do was, once I had understood this, was to buy time to come up with a counter proposal. They leverage my relationships to buy time. And the third thing I would have to do was develop a presentation with my team that would be persuasive enough to get them to stay. So those are the 3 ways I thought about solving this problem. And so the first thing, by the way, so you see what I just did? She introduced her strategy for addressing the challenge. This is part of the action, right? Problem, action, result. She introduced it. That's what you want to do. Show how your brain works. Don't just say, first I did this, then I did this, then I did that, then I did that. Say, here's how I approach the problem, right? Talk about how you think. That's what you're going to be bringing to them. Okay. So she said, here are the 3 things I was thinking about. So in terms of understanding the problem, understanding the issue they were having with us and what the competitor was offering, I really leveraged my network to gain that understanding. And I found out that the competitor was offering something we just didn't have yet. They were offering something we couldn't provide, and the things we were providing, they were giving a discount on versus what we were charging. So that was a big issue for us. So what I did was I was able to, again, through my network, I had a lot of connections with the C-level. I contacted them. I said, I know you're talking to a competitor. I have some thoughts for you that I think you really want to hear. Give me a week, and I think I'm going to want to share with you some ideas that I think will be in your interest to hear. And because I had this great relationship with the C-level executives, they agreed. So you see how she's doing this? Like she's bringing in like, oh, I have C-level relationships. Like it's interesting, right? So I got together with my team. We came up with this great proposal that talked about what we could deliver for them that no other competitor could deliver, our unique competitive advantage. We came up with a fantastic presentation. I went with my team to present, and a couple of the C-level executives I worked for. We went there as a group. We presented, and it was persuasive. The result was not only did they change their mind and decide to stay with us, but they ultimately gave us more business. Don't you see how that's a better story? You agree with me? Okay. So who wants to take a shot at this? You'll get feedback from me and you'll help everybody else. Who wants to? I want to ask here. Here's a question I want to ask you, okay? Well, you know what? Let's not do this yet. Let's do this in a couple minutes. Okay? And you'll see why. We'll see why. So that's how you do a story. And I'm going to ask for a guinea pig in a couple of minutes. So let's talk about how to handle difficult interview questions where you want to look for opportunity to bring in your story. Okay? So the way you handle any interview you get, okay? Any question you get, the first thing you want to do is not think what is the right answer. That's not what you want to do. That's what most job seekers do if they don't know any better. That's what I used to do before I learned all this stuff. Be like, oh, what is the right answer? I better memorize the right answer to every question. Most of the time, that's not how you want to approach it. Sometimes that is, like with the pitch, that's like where you're memorizing the answer to those open-ended questions, right? There are some exceptions. The weaknesses questions, you want to memorize the answer, all right? We'll get to that. But most of the time, it's not about memorizing the answer. It's about a certain way you need to think. You got to learn how to think differently. And it's about, you want to think about how to play it. You got to think about it like, this is a game, and I got to play the game the right way to win the game. That's how you want to think about the interview and every interview question you get. Just like before when we were talking to you about that situation. Your first thought, remember we were talking, you were saying, oh, I had medical leave, and then I've been looking for a job since June, and all that, right? Now, if you're not thinking about this is a game, I got to figure out how to play it, you're going to just say, well, I got sick, and I was out for a while, and they, and while I was sick, they gave it to other people, and I haven't been able to find a job since June. That is not thinking this is a game, I got to figure out how to play it. That's just spilling the beans and getting them to say, oh, so sorry, we're going to hire somebody else. Okay? When you think about how to play it, right, and if you do this and you practice it, this will all happen in 1 second in your head. You just need to pause for 1 second, and you're going to think like this. The first thing you want to think about is, can I use this question to show I can help them using one of the success stories I prepared? That is your very first thought, because you want to get these stories heard. That's what's going to make you super memorable. That's what they're going to remember. Okay? Now, sometimes I'll ask you a question where you can't bring in a story. If you can't bring in a story, then you got two options. And that means you want to get past the question, because if it's a question where you can't bring in a story, then it's not about showing how you can help them. That means you're off topic. You're talking about something other than how you can help them. That's not good. You with me? Right? You want to refocus on how you can help them. So how do you do that? You answer, first of all, anything you say at this point, you answer it briefly and change the subject, okay? You can either answer it briefly by sidestepping the question, and I'll explain that in more detail in a couple minutes, or you can be brief in your answer and change the subject back to them, to why you want to work there, and then ask him a question about how you can help them. That's what we did with you. You answered it briefly, you kept it as positive as possible, and then you changed the subject back to them, saying, and I'm excited to be talking to you because, and told them why, and then you asked them a question about how you can help them. That's what we did, right? When we discussed how to handle your situation. So that's the formula. So how do you put this? This is about reprogramming your brain. It's not easy to do, because I know I've been doing this with clients for many years now. It's something you got to learn, you got to practice. You got to practice to think this way, not what is the right answer, but how can I play the game to win? And this is how you play the game. By first thinking about, can I use this question as an opportunity to show them how I can help them with one of my success stories? And if yes, answer the question and then bring in your success story as an example. So, here's a typical interview question. What's your greatest strength? You probably heard that before, right? What's your greatest strength? Who wants to take a shot at it? Come on, somebody here. You'll get helpful feedback from me. It's going to help you with your interview, and you're going to help everybody else at the same time. And everybody will be so impressed that you did this. Yes, go ahead. What's your greatest strength?
Problem solving. Because in my line of work, oftentimes issue a problem for different clients, and I figure it out a lot of times instantly. Sometimes I take my time, but I always solve the issue.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for volunteering. I really appreciate it. So does everybody else. Okay? So what you said was your greatest strength, you're a problem solver, because if somebody, was it a client or customer, calls in, you can usually figure out what the issue is and how to solve it very quickly. That's your answer, right? Okay. That's half the answer. It's a good 50% of the answer. The other 50%, let's look at what this, can I use the question to show I can help them using a story? You say, I'm a problem solver. I can usually figure out very quickly how to help clients who call in with issues that might stump others. Let me give you an example. So you could see what I mean. Or you might even ask them, do you want to hear an example? they'll say yes, because that's what they want. And then you give them an example. So let me hear your example. I know you haven't rehearsed it, but let's give it a shot. Let's give it a shot. Problem, action, result. Go ahead.
Okay, I go back personal, I guess I'll go. What I do is
By the way, what before you, just for everybody else, like, what is it that you do?
I'm a media editor for technology advertising. Basically, we bring in, all the advertising that comes in, we distribute it, and my job is to look over the advertisement, look over the ad, and make sure that it's qualified to be broadcast. So this includes like a lot of ads that are not up to spec, not up to that maybe misspellings or things like that, or a lot of times we're dealing with local spots, they can't be broadcast because it won't, because the file's too small.
Okay. Yep, I got it. So you're a media editor, and basically what you do is you look at the ads and you make sure they work for the company, right? They're up to spec. And at the same time, you don't want to alienate clients because they're paying you, right? So you have to work with the clients too. So that's what you do, right? So tell me what's your greatest strength?
Usually, I can calmly email my clients and tell them like how to solve the problem without making them feel like they're inadequate. Because a lot of times I deal with the manager versus the person who actually put the editor who put the ad together. And because a lot of times they don't know what I'm talking about, and I put it simply in a form that, all right, this is what it is.
Okay, hold on, I'm going to stop you. I want you to tell a story. I know you're giving it in very general terms. You need to be specific. So I like what you said before. I'm a problem solver. For my, problems I face are, that ads that aren't up to spec and keeping clients happy, right? Here's an example. And you're not giving me an example. I want you to be really specific. Here's an example. Maybe you're not ready to do it, but do you have an example of how you have a challenging situation where you had a really big client that you wanted to make sure they weren't upset, but there was some issue that they just weren't getting, and how you dealt with it?
Sure. I had a client who brought in an ad that no matter how many times we gave basically instruction on how to fix the ad, the person would not believe that there's anything wrong with it. So I took it upon myself, and along with my senior producer, to talk to the client and say, we will fix this for you as long as you approve of this. And we did it. We fixed it for them.
Okay, good. So what you basically said is, I had a client who, no matter how many times you told them that they have to change something, they just weren't buying it and they didn't want to accept it, right? So you were able to, work out something with them is, if you gave them, I guess, something that they wanted, if they made the change that you wanted as well. Like you were able to find a way to get what you needed by giving them something they needed, right? Okay, you've got the raw material for a great story. Here's how you improve it. Okay, and thank you, by the way. So you say, this client was really important to us, right? Because this client was really important to us. They'd given us a lot of business, and we were having a problem. They just didn't. If we gave them what they wanted, we would have gotten sued. I'm making this up, right? It would have been a big issue, tied to the bottom line. I don't know if that's the case. We would have gotten sued. It was against the law. It would have broken out. It would have caused a big problem for us. And so we couldn't give them what they wanted. But at the same time, we didn't want to lose them because they were giving us so much money, right? I don't know. You'll have to decide that. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Okay, but this is how you make it more. You tie it to the bottom line. Are you with me? Okay. So you didn't do that, and this is how you might do it. Okay? Then you say, so here's what I did. I figured out, listen, they're not willing to give them what, maybe if we can do a little bit of, because they're so important to us, maybe we can give them something to induce them to stay with us, make the changes we need, because we'll be able to give them something in return that really won't cost us anything. I came up with that idea. So you're talking about how you think, right? You're introducing it. This is my thought process was, they're so important to us, we can't lose them. and we can't violate this policy. So I had to come up with a solution, and this is how my thought, right? This is how my brain works. And so then you said, so I proposed to my boss that this is what we do, right? Is what you did. I got it approved. My boss loved the idea. I presented it to the client. They loved it. They ended up we made the change for them, and the result was not only did the ad run, but they gave us like, tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars or more business over the subsequent years because I was able to make them happy in the situation or something like that. That's how you tell a good story. Okay? Is everybody with me on this? So you see how you take a story that's like, it's okay, it's not bad, not great, and make it more interesting. Okay? That's what I want you to do. Okay? Now, and you see how you bring in, the stories to answer any questions. Your first thought, really the way your brain should work, is not what is the right answer. Your brain should work like this. You should say, I have this great story that I promised Rob in this seminar he gave, I would try to get this story out in every interview that I have. Can I use this story, can I bring in this story to answer the question they're asking me? That's what your first thought should be. Can I bring in this great story, or one of these 3 great stories I have, in answer to the question they're asking me? That's how you should be thinking, not what is the right answer. Can I bring in this story? You see, it's like a totally different way of thinking. Can I bring in this great story? And then you say, well, okay, in your case, right? You say, well, I did this great thing that they would love, how I think out of the box and how I can work with clients. I really want to bring this story in because that's the kind of thing I know they need. So they just asked me, what's my greatest strength? What strength did I use in that story? That's how you should be thinking. What strength? You probably use lots of strength. Relationship building, influencing, problem solving, as you said, thinking out of the box. My greatest strength is trying to make things a win-win. Like, you could say anything as an excuse to bring in the story, because you know what? They're not going to remember problem solving. They're not going to remember that. It goes in one ear and out the other. What they will remember is the great story. That's how you want to think about the answer to every question. Start with, what story do I want to try and bring in here, and can I use this question as an opportunity to do it? Then how do I do it? Honestly, if you practice this a lot, this happens in 1 second in your head. Really. Can you sort of see that? Yeah.
So I had a question regarding behavior, how to answer behavioral questions. For instance, if they ask you a specific question which has negative connotation to it, for example, tell me about a time when you were criticized by your supervisor, how do you answer it and put a positive spin to it?
Okay, I'm sorry. Tell me about a what? What was the question? We're going to get to that right now. Great segue. Okay, let me answer this question and address that, and then we'll get to you. Okay, so there are some questions that you've got to memorize the answer. Tell me about a time where you were criticized by your supervisor, all right? So here's a whole bunch of questions. Let's address a few of these, all right? Now, okay, so these here, like, where is it? Okay, give an example of an obstacle you faced at work, or, give an example of an assignment that you weren't proud of, or you didn't get the outcome you wanted. What's your greatest weakness? Give me an example of a criticism you received. Give me an example of a time you failed. Like, they're all the same question. They're all the same question. They're all designed to get you to say something negative about yourself. And the reason they ask this question for 2 reasons. The first reason they ask this question is they want you to see if you're going to say something that's going to totally derail your candidacy. So if they ask what's your greatest weakness, and you say, well, I tend to fall asleep at my desk after lunch, not great, right? They're like, well, that's not going to really work for this job, so forget it, right? That's one reason they ask this question. The second reason they ask this question is they want to see maturity. They want to see that you're someone, especially at more senior level, someone who's thoughtful, who can be self-reflective, who can learn from mistakes and grow, okay? So the best answer to this question is something that will not derail your candidacy, but it will at the same time show that maturity. So the way you want to answer this question, to your point, right, to your question, is bring up something you learned about yourself a long time ago. And it's the same answer to all these questions, by the way. It's the very same answer. Bring something you learned about yourself a long time ago, show how you learn from it and it's helped you ever since, and maybe even segue into one of your success stories to illustrate how it's helped you. So just to give you an example, like I had a client who, she had a similar question to you. I said, well, what did you learn about yourself? Tell me about something that you, earlier in your career, like you really learned about yourself. She said, early in my career, I tend to be a perfectionist. And that's not great. It might sound good, but it's really not good because I learned early on that if I try to dot every I and cross every T, then a lot of things that need to get done won't get done. And my boss criticized me for that. I heard it from my boss. Or if they asked the question, what's your greatest weakness? She could have said, that's an area that was a weakness for me, that I tend to be too much of a perfectionist, so it hurt my ability to prioritize. Or if they said, give me an example of a time you failed, she would say, well, one time, early in my career, there was a key project I didn't get to because I was spending too much time trying to be perfect with everything else. You see how you can, just one thing can answer all these questions. So then she says, so I learned this about myself 15 years ago, and it's helped me ever since. Ever since my boss brought that up, I resolved to be aware of that, and I adopted the 80-20 rule, for example. You can look that up if you don't know what the 80-20 rule is. You can Google it. It's a thing, right? Like, it's a way of prioritizing. I live by the 80-20 rule. I live by the phrase, the perfect is the enemy of the good. So I am always keeping that top of mind because I know about this perfectionism, and it's really helped me to balance my perfectionism with prioritization. And that's why I've been so successful in my career ever since. And then you might even give an example. That's how you address it. Okay? That's what you need to do for all these questions. Okay? So go ahead, quick, yeah.
Interviews, they tell me about your past experience. I've had a couple internships. I typically will be anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes telling them about my past experience, and then I'll draw it out on either if they have a whiteboard or I'll take a piece of paper, and then I tie that into what's your biggest weakness. I say, identifying the big picture, and this is how I worked on it. Am I either taking too long to explain my past, or should I not use a whiteboard or paper?
I think if they say, tell me about your experience, you start going on a whiteboard and paper in 20 minutes, it's probably too much. They're not asking for that. What you can do, if you're not sure, you could say, do you want the short version or the long version? Or what I would do is give them the short version. Happy to give you more detail, but the short version is, and by the way, it's a great question because you say, tell me about your experience. Give them your pitch. It's your 2-minute pitch, right? It's not getting on a whiteboard. 2 minutes. If it's more than that, it's too long. They're going to get bored. That's really what you should be thinking about. They don't want a whole dissertation. They really don't. It's too much. Like you're derailing the interview. They're seeing that you're not sort of getting what they're asking. 2 minutes, 2-minute pitch. Okay? That's what we're discussing here. So when they ask, so I appreciate you're asking that because it just shows like, if they say, take me through your resume, sometimes you get a question like that, right? That's what you can do is it's another open-ended question. Do they want to know every little thing about your resume? No, they want to know, how can you help me, right? How can you help me? Why do you want to work here? Will you fit in? So if you want to say, well, in high school, I graduated, and then I majored in this, and then I decided to switch my major, and then when I graduated college, my first job, I took this temp job until I could find a full-time job. They don't want to know. They want to know, how can you help me? So what you do is you might even say, listen, if you see I would always try to segue to your 2-minute pitch when you get these open-ended questions. You can say, if you look at my resume, you'll see a theme. The theme is, I'm making this up, relationship management. Every job has always been, even though it looks like I've changed careers, the theme has always been about working with people and helping people. And in every job, I've done that. And in fact, if you want, I can give you a couple of examples. Like in this job, I did X, which resulted in Y. You see how you go into your pitch? Like you're sort of getting to your pitch that way, okay? And then get into your pitch. So let's talk about some of these other interview questions, okay? So just quickly, so you can see a couple of them at the top. These came from real clients and who said, Rob, I got these interview questions, I didn't know how to answer them. How would you find a needle in a haystack? Or if you were a car, what kind of car would you be, right? So your first thought is, come on, I know how to answer this, right? Or you just say something like a needle. I think people say things like, oh, I have a needle in a haystack. I get a magnet, or something like that, right? Not bad, not terrible, right? But really the best, if you're doing this, if you're doing what I'm asking you to do, which your first thought is, can I use this question to show I can help them using a story? If that's your first thought, then maybe you might think of it a little bit differently. You might say, you know, needle in a haystack, that really reminds me of this situation we had not long ago where something went wrong and it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. So let me tell you more about that. And then you tell them one of your stories, right? Or if it's like the car I would drive, what would it be? Like you say, well, I'm making this up in 1 second. This is like, because I'm trained to think this way. I've trained myself, right? Car I would drive, the car that gets me to the place I need to go the fastest and the most efficient. Some combination of fast and efficiently. That's the way I work. Let me give you an example of what I mean. Who cares about the car, right? Who cares? Get to the story. That's what's going to make it memorable. That's what they want, okay? Or if you have a real car, you could say, you know, Chevy, whatever, right? And because it's super fast and it's efficient, it comes, if you happen to know that, but you don't have to, okay? Just get to the story if you can, all right? If they ask you any question like, give me an example from your experience that's relevant to what we need to do, you should, that's a gift. They're saying, please tell me one of your success stories, right? If they say an obstacle you faced, that's a gift. They're saying, please tell me one of your success stories, right? You want that, okay? If they say, how have you dealt with a difficult boss? Who wants to try that? Go ahead. Yeah.
Very simple. Can I use a real experience?
You sure bet.
Okay, I'm leaving names out. First off, so how I dealt with a difficult boss. You know, I used to work in a real estate firm down in the middle of Manhattan, right by the Trump building. So we would often get a lot of clients and a lot of clientele. The boss himself, very hard-nosed, perfectionist, but overlooked a lot of minute details. So how I managed to get through into working with a difficult boss is making sure I picked up the minute details along the way that she missed, and then working through the problems little by little and assessing them. And then afterwards, running a verification check through some of the other employees that worked alongside me at the desk. So that way I could get the best possible scenario and answer going through for the rest of the day. So when the difficult boss gave me a couple of series of questions to information she didn't know, she can trust and rely on me in order to deliver and make sure that the work was done effectively, 100%.
Got it. Okay. Good, but it can be even better. Okay? Here's why it can be better. Okay? So first of all, difficult. Is that a positive word or a negative word? Remember we said negativity is a no-no? Do you have to buy into the idea of a difficult boss? Like, try. You say, I never had a difficult boss. I don't see my bosses or even my colleagues. I don't see people as difficult. I've had challenging bosses. I love a challenge. You know, number one, right? Okay. So then you might say it that way. Then you want to go into your example, but make it an example. Make it one of your success stories. This doesn't sound like a success story. It sounds like how you dealt with a difficult boss. I've had challenging bosses. And I love a challenge. Let me give you an example. Then talk about one of your stories in the context of like a deadline, and your boss is expecting this, and you had to, and they really, you said they're very stickler for detail. Was that the issue? They were. Right. So you could say my boss was very hands-on, and I was able to, just talk about how you adapted your style, but in the context of one of your success stories. Okay, so you can bring in your story. Always try to bring in your story. Okay? Okay, that's how you can improve it. Is this resonating? Okay. If they say, do you prefer a hands-on or a hands-off boss? What do you say? You said either or? Either or? Doesn't matter. Great answers. I love it. Why do you have to pick one? If you pick one, it's sort of negative because you're saying the other one you don't like. Right? You don't want that negativity because I can work with either one, even if you prefer one. Don't say it. Then you say, what do you? Well, what do you like? What is this boss like? Or then you can learn more, right? Or maybe even give one of your success stories. You say, I can work with either one. Let me give you an example. Bring in your success story and bring that element into your story. Yeah. What's your greatest weakness? The same way we discussed before about I was giving you the example about like criticism your boss gave you. What's your greatest weakness? Remember about the perfectionist? I tend to be a perfectionist. I learned that about myself a long time ago, but what I've done to address that has really helped my career. I learned that about that 15 years ago. And ever since then, I adopted the 80-20 rule. It's the answer I gave before. Okay? It's the same question. Okay, so I think we need to move on, but are you getting like how you address, how you getting this mindset here? It's a whole different thing. You got to practice it. Okay? All right. So, let's skip over this. Okay. Okay. What do you tell the interviewer if she or he asks about salary? Somebody asked, how do you handle that before, right? Didn't somebody here ask that? I'm sure you're all thinking about that, right? What do?
You can't just ask them. I just say straight up, what's the comp?
In an interview, right? Okay, that's what you say. Okay. What do other people think?
What is the best that you can give me, or the best you can give me?
So if they say, what are you looking for? You say, what's the best you can give me? Okay. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, that it's, I mean, it's not important for you, can you say that it's not important for you, the salary?
Okay, you say it's not important?
Yeah, can you tell that?
Okay, I'll keep that in mind. What else? I'll answer in a second. Any other thoughts?
The research on it, like how you can, like, have you seen if they could have a range or something somewhere, like through Glassdoor, and kind of, like, whenever they bring up a question, maybe during the third interview, mention that?
Okay. So you're saying research it, look at the range, and then bring it up. Okay. So go ahead.
This is a recent trend where they ask the salary up front. Usually at the end of the interview, when you get the offer, you discuss salary at the end. So this is discussed up front at the interview.
Right. So, excuse me. So, I don't like any of your answers. Sorry. Okay. Let me tell you how to do this. Okay, and I'll explain to you why. Okay. You don't want to discuss salary until after. They're going to ask you. They ask you up front. To HR, you talk to HR, they're always going to ask you that because they don't really know the job well, but they know how to ask what salary you're looking for, right? That's what they know. So you don't want it, but it's in your interest to avoid talking about salary until after they make you the offer because right now they have all the leverage. Right? They're using it as a screening question, like, oh, you're too expensive, forget it. Right? Or maybe they'll lowball you if you give a low number. Or maybe they'll think, oh, low number, maybe they're not that senior. After they make you the offer, all the leverage instantly switches to you. And you can then negotiate all these things that weren't negotiable before. Before, they would never negotiate this stuff. They were like, forget it. Now they want you to start yesterday. They decided they like you. They're not thinking about anybody else. Now's your time to negotiate. So if they're asking you about salary, how can you possibly avoid answering it, right? That's what I'm basically telling you. Don't answer it, right? Try to postpone it. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you can't. Many times you can. I'm going to give you the script. Do you have a question? Okay. Let me give you the script, okay? And sometimes you have to say something, okay? The first thing I want you to say that's going to work 50% of the time is salary, and I'm going to email you the slides. In fact, you know what? Before I forget, let me send out this sign-up sheet. Hold on. Here, could you let me start from this side and then the other side. And just write your email so I can read it. And I'll give me a day or two and I'll get you the slides, okay? So anyway, the first thing you want to say, it's going to work at least 50% of the time, is salary's not going to be an issue. I know we're both fair, we're both reasonable, we'll be able to work something out. That's going to work half the time. They'll be like, okay. The other half of the time it won't. They'll be like, well, I know you say that, but we really do need a number just to see if we should move forward. So can you tell us, right? So in those cases, what do? You go to step 2, which is one of these two things. In fact, I like the second thing, I think, the best, which is, well, you're asking me what I'm looking for. Well, I'm looking to get paid the market rate for this role. I just want to get paid what the market rate values this role. What's the market rate for this role? And I haven't completed my due diligence yet. I'm still doing the research on what that market rate is. I bet you've completed your due diligence. What have you budgeted for this role? Like, turn it back to them. Okay? And then when they give a number, unless it's way, way off, like half what the lowest you'd accept, just say we'll be able to work something out, and you can negotiate later. Okay? Now, if they say, well, you say we'll be able to work something out, and now they're still pushing you, look, and maybe they're getting impatient, right? But that's probably going to work at this point, right? They'll tell you a number, and then you can say we'll be able to work something out. Okay? If they really insist, give them a range. The lowest you could possibly accept to the highest you think they would ever give. You could say, 125 to 185. That's a pretty big range, right? Or something like that, right? Depending on the results of my research, my due diligence, and what I'm learning about the role. I'm still learning. I'm still talking to you and to people about the role. I'm still understanding what you want me to do. Something like that. Okay? That's how you do it. Now, if they say, what are you making now? Or what did you make in your last job? First of all, that's an illegal question in New York. I don't think it is in New Jersey yet. It is now? Okay. So it's just like any other illegal question. If they ask it, because it's illegal, just switch to this script. Just pretend you didn't hear it that way. Just say salary's not going to be an issue. I know we'll be able to work something out. Just pivot to this. Okay? Pivot to the underlying thing, which is, can we afford you and how much we have to pay you? And that's this script. Okay. Now, a few things about what you should do and not do at the interview. Okay? At the interview, you want to get there early. You want to take notes. And get there early just because you can learn about things that you might not see otherwise. Like, you don't want to get there early because people hate lateness. But I'm saying get there really early, like half an hour early. Don't get announced half an hour early because that's rude. They might not be ready for you. But just say, listen, I'm going to wait here. I know I'm half an hour early. I'm just going to wait here. Maybe you can announce me 5 minutes before. Then just see what people are doing. Are they smiling? Are they frowning? Strike up a conversation with the admin. I remember when I was at my first job out of college, I had an interview at Marie Midland Bank, which hasn't existed in a long time. Just shows you how old I am. And but I remember I got there early by accident. I don't know what I was doing, and I was at the water cooler and waiting to be announced. And some guy saw me there at the water cooler. He said, "Hey, you interviewing for this job?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Listen, you don't want to work here. It's a zoo." So I just filed that. I said, maybe this is just a disgruntled employee, but I kept it in my mind. I ended up getting an offer. I took the job. It was a zoo. The place was a zoo. I mean, you never know what you can learn. So you just never know. So just keep that in mind, all right? Now, so take notes. Now, I don't want you to jot down things, furiously jotting down things. You got to maintain eye contact. But just jot down a word or two here or there because you have to remember what is resonating with them, what issues they might have with your candidacy, anything you can come up with in the conversation, right, through your questions, like what's important to them. You got to remember, especially if you're meeting with multiple people, have a page for each person. So anything you write on that page is for them. You just got to remember so you can follow up effectively, okay? Look them in the eye, firm handshake, all that stuff, right? Dress professionally, look the part, okay? Okay, no fish handshakes, don't have yourself announced too early, right? You get the idea. Negativity is a no-no. Don't be an interview know-it-all. Don't say, I know what you need to do. You got to phrase it, even if you think you do. Phrase it as a question. Have you tried this? This worked for us, or this worked for a client of ours. Have you ever thought about this? Phrase it that way. Okay? Now, towards the end of the interview, these are two questions you must ask, okay? The first question, when they say, do you have any more questions for me? The first thing you want to ask is, just so I'm clear on what you're looking for, I'm curious as to how I compare with some of the other candidates you're interviewing with. Okay? The second question, related question you want to ask is, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process? Okay? You want to ask both of these questions because the sale doesn't begin until you find out what their objections are. You might be thinking, and this happens all the time, it's happened to me in my career early on before I knew what I was doing. You think, oh, it went great. The interview went great, they loved me, and then they turn you down. They give the offer to somebody else. I don't want that to ever happen to you. I want you to know what their issues are before you walk out of that room because then you have an opportunity to influence the outcome, either in the interview or in the follow-up. And we'll talk about follow-up in a second. So now, the only reason they won't answer these questions is if you're so far off that they're just embarrassed, that means you'll never get the job anyway, right? Maybe there's some interpersonal issue and they can't tell you, I don't like you, right? Then they're not going to say that. So then they just won't answer and say, well, we don't feel comfortable answering it, right? But you'll never get the job anyway, so who cares, right? Otherwise, you really should ask it. Most of the time, you will get a straight answer that can really help you. I'm going to give you an example in a couple minutes, okay? So ask these questions. I know you may be reluctant. Trust me, please ask these questions. Okay, do me a favor, and do you a favor. Now, the follow-up. This is where you can turn a no into a yes. The follow-up, Who writes thank you letters? Most of you, right? I don't want you to write thank you letters anymore. No more thank you, okay? You're like, what? What do you mean no more thank you letters? What, are you kidding? I'm serious here. Don't write thank you letters. I want you to write influence letters, influence emails. It's no longer about thanking you. It's about influencing the outcome. Do whatever it takes to close the deal. Just like we were talking about the consultative sale, consultants aren't writing thank you letters. They're saying, here's what you told me about what your issues are. Here's how I can help you, right? Isn't that what a consultant does? That's what you have to do, okay? It's something that's personal. It's different for each person you've met with, okay? So I know I'm asking you to do a lot of work. You're going to try and write a generic thank you letter. I'm saying don't do that. The best practice is to hear what each person's issues are and address them in an influence email that's personal to them, okay? And, things you forgot to bring up, things that resonated with them that you want to re-emphasize. Like, I was so glad to hear that you liked my experience in X because I do agree it is unique, or something like that, right? Remind them how great you are and what they liked about you. Bring up things you forgot, maybe things you didn't do justice to in the interview. Maybe if they had objections to your candidacy, if you ask, like, how do I compare? And they say, well, look, you're good, but we have a couple of other candidates who have more experience in X than you. So we're sort of leaning towards them. Well, you better address that in this and follow-up. Hopefully you were able to address it in the interview, but if not, address it in the follow-up, okay? Or if they say, if you ask, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward? And they say, look, you are the best candidate we've seen, but we still haven't found anybody who can do X, so we're expanding our search. You better address that in the influence email or you're not going to get the offer, okay? So this is your time. Don't address it as like you objected to. Don't use those negative words. Just talk about how you can help them or your unique competitive advantage in a more positive way, addressing the objection that way. So in order to do this properly, you gotta listen for their issues, listen for their challenges, listen for their problems. It means you gotta ask the right questions and you gotta listen. Very important, and you gotta remember. And taking notes will help you to remember. Again, always remember to maintain that eye contact, okay? But take notes. Let me give you an example. We're gonna end this with an example, okay? So Julie's you'll see all these. I'm gonna send them to you, okay? And you have the handout there, by the way, because I knew you wouldn't be able to read this. It's too much. We're not gonna go through this word by word. But let me give you the background here. So Julie, she was going for a sales director role. And so she had a bunch of interviews with people in the organization, and they loved her, she loved them. It was great. It was going really well. Then she had an interview with the executive vice president, the number 2 person in this organization. And she had that great conversation. She thought it was going really well. Then she asked one of those 2 questions. She said, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process? He said, frankly, we're not going to move you forward. She was shocked. She was like, what? I thought this was a great conversation. I had all these great conversations. What do you mean? He said, well, the issue is that we're looking for someone to run the sales team who has really strong analytic skills, who's able to dive into the data, dive into the spreadsheets, and use that analysis to help steer the sales team. And I don't see that in your background. And she was surprised and shocked, and she didn't know what to say because she didn't realize that was such an important part of the job. So all she could say was, I'll address it. So what she did is we got together, we talked about it, and she wrote this, with my help, this great influence email. This whole influence email, if you read it, it's all about her great analytic skills that she didn't bring up in the interview, okay? Then she says, she's like, I offer superior analytic ability, right? Then she wrote, I know from my own experience that you only succeed at what you measure, so I understand the importance of data analysis to success of this position, right? Blah, 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 blah. Then she said, I would like to demonstrate my ability in this area. If you're amenable, I propose that I analyze some of the department's spreadsheets containing sales data, and I'll present my findings to you. I'm happy to sign any confidentiality agreement, or feel free to alter the numbers as necessary. That's no thank you note, right? This is an influence email. So she sent this email. She didn't hear anything from the guy. She's like, oh, all right, wasn't interested, back to the drawing board. A week later, she got a 3-word message from him. Okay, here. Maybe that's a 2-word message. I don't know. Okay here. Okay? He sent her a spreadsheet with data attached to the email. So she had this 3-day weekend. She analyzed the heck out of this data, showed it to other people, got some feedback, sent it to him at the end of this 3-day weekend, said, here are my results, and here's my analysis and my recommendations, and I'm going to get a meeting on your calendar to discuss this with you. This is very important. If you do this kind of work, don't just say looking forward to your thoughts. Get the meeting. Be proactive. You got to be assertive. Be like a salesperson, right? A great consultative salesperson for yourself. I'm going to get the meeting. She got on his calendar, got another meeting. They hardly talked about the analysis. They were just having another conversation about the job. He hardly asked her about the analysis. At the end of the meeting, she said, how do you feel about moving my candidacy forward in the process? She said, now he said, I feel great about it. You're really good. You're a really strong candidate. Then she asked the other question. How do I compare with the other candidates? He said, frankly, we have another candidate. You're one of the top 2 now. She went from being out early on to be one of the top 2. You're one of the top 2, but the other guy has done exactly this job and you haven't. So we're leaning towards him. So what'd she do? She wrote another influence email. Okay? This other influence email, because she couldn't argue, and you can read this, okay? You can read this on, when you get a chance. She couldn't argue with the fact that this guy, her competitor, had done this job before, and she hadn't. It's just a fact, right? But what she could do is bring up her unique competitive advantage, the experience that she uniquely had that almost no one else has, including her competitor, that was going to be so fantastic that they should hire her just for that. That's what this whole email was about. The result, they hired her. Okay? This is an example. I gave you a couple more influence emails. This one is really interesting, this last one. In this case, this guy, it was a client, it was a woman. She got rejected. You can read the rejection. They basically said, listen, my point is that we're expanding the scope of our search with a wider net. Pat, my point is we're narrowing a search down to folks who have done this exact job with recent experience and current context, meaning you don't have that. Pat or I will be back in touch in the event we end up expanding the scope of our search with a wider net. So that she just say, oh, back to the drawing board. No. What she said was, she wrote an influence email. She said, and she was very gracious. She said, Ann and Pat, I appreciate your candor. From the note, it sounds like you're identifying some highly qualified candidates. Very nice, right? Then she said, I would like to note, however, this great experience that differentiates me. And she listed it out in bullet point form, right? And which is a very important point, by the way. All your communications need to be very easily scannable to the human eye. No big, dense paragraphs, right? Short paragraphs, bullets, bolding, underlining it, underlining. This isn't like English Literature 101. This is business writing. Everything's about speed of having that information jump into the reader's brain as quickly as possible. So you can see this is very easily scannable, okay? And she just makes the points. This is why I'm great. I'm better than your competitors. When they got this email, they asked her to come back in. And they ultimately made her an offer. Okay? It's just showing you what you can do to influence the outcome and turn no into a yes, okay? Yeah, and then we got to wrap up.
In the first email that you showed, wouldn't it have been more effective for the person to have stated those things as soon as she knew that they weren't gonna move forward with their candidate?
Yes, but she didn't have an answer. You're right. The question is, should they have stated that as soon as she heard it in the interview? Ideally, it would be great to state it in the interview and then address it in the follow-up as well, both. But she didn't know. She was sort of like, she was surprised. So you may get surprised. Feel free to say, I'll address it, right? Or if you don't have a good answer, and then come up with your answer and then do the follow-up. Yeah.
What do you suggest for an effective subject line?
Oh, to follow up after an interview? Follow up from our meeting on Tuesday, right? Or if it's more of a conventional influence email where there's no objection, you just say, it can be the same thing, just the same thing. Same thing, really, okay? Follow up from our meeting on Tuesday, RE the X position. Any other quick questions? Yeah.
Just a real quick question. Obviously, I'm not a youngster. What do you do about, do you address that when somebody, if they ask you, I know they can't ask you how old you are, but you just go in and pretend that you're not older.
All right. So your question is, if sometimes this goes to a lot of issues. I'm going to answer this, and I think we should wrap up, okay? Because I think other people might have this issue. You might think like you're thinking yourself like there's age discrimination, like I'm too old, right? I'm overqualified. People get that a lot, right? Maybe I'm underqualified. Maybe I'm too short, or I'm too tall, or I'm too fat or thin, or who knows what it is, right? You know, the key here to overcoming all those issues, there's one key to overcoming every one of these things, right? Is to show them that you get them, that you're enthused, that you're really motivated by what they're doing, that you sort of like really dig them and you would love to work for them. Show that motivation and that you would fit in overcomes all those objections. That's the way to overcome those objections. They forget, because when they're thinking those things, they're thinking those things, they're really thinking, this is what they're thinking. They're thinking, is she going to want too much money? Is she going to resent working for someone younger than her? Or is the person younger than her going to have trouble managing someone so much older? Or is she going to be bored if you're overqualified and she's going to leave in 6 months, right? So that's how you overcome those issues. You just show that this is where you got to do your research, and you got to really have a good answer to why you want to work there. You got to show that you get them. That'll overcome these objections. That's how you do it, okay? So look, we got to run. It's already after 8, and I don't want to hold you up, okay? There are a couple of books on my website. My website is here, hellmanconsulting.com. I'll send you the slides if somebody could pass me those sign-up sheets. There's my email address. It was great sharing this information with you. Thank you all.